Hello, everyone, and welcome to Master's Thesis 2024, a little overview of methods. I'm Sarah Lynne Bowman, and I am a senior lecturer at Uppsala University. So what is a method? The idea of methods and methodology might sound a bit scary because it's sort of this systemized way of understanding how we evaluate our research and how we analyze our data. So consider playing a game for fun versus playing a game to analyze it for a class or play testing a game in order to make it better. These are different, right? Think about what you would do differently. Think about how you think differently, what procedures you follow, what assumptions underlie your analysis. How do you present information to the class? In what format should your information be communicated? And how do you convey what you know, what you have learned, or what you have experienced? So the method allows you to make things more clear that would otherwise be a little bit vague or perhaps intuitive. So there may be parts of your process that you've always done and are pretty easy. There may be other parts that are really important, for example, for ethics, that you haven't necessarily detailed in the past, but in a method section, you're actually detailing these things. So you may not realize it, but the answers to these questions do inform your methodology, which is a set or system of methods, principles, and rules for regulating a given discipline, as in the arts or sciences, the underlying principles and rules of organization of a philosophical system or inquiry procedure, and the study of principles underlying the organization of various sciences and the conduct of scientific inquiry. And these are quotes from dictionary.com. So as you can see, it's sort of a proceduralization of a particular discipline. And game design is mostly design focused, although you will have the option to do many different kinds of methods in these courses. Game design and game testing and prototyping, research through design, those are some. So each of us throughout our schooling has been taught at least one way to view the world and analyze it. If you've ever been taught in a literature class how to unpack the symbolism, well, you've been taught how to do a close reading, for example. So each discipline or academic field has its own logic, its sets of rules, ways of viewing and of knowing the world. Our field, game design, is inherently interdisciplinary, which means that we draw from many different disciplines and we come from different backgrounds. So some of us come from the arts, some of us come from humanities, some even come from the hard sciences or computational sciences, and others come from the social sciences. And then if you're anything like me, I like to dabble in several of these. So that means it's hard to have one specific way of doing things. It depends on your research project and what is needed. So a method is a structured technique that allows you to analyze your quote unquote object of study. Now this language makes you the subject, the person who has the gaze, basically. We'll talk about the gaze later. And then the research object is the object of study. Now, of course, if you think about that term object, it's part of this term objectification, right? Where people can be made to feel like objects. And so when we're thinking about our research and our methodology, it's important to realize that, especially if we're working with human subjects, as we'll see in later videos, i.e. people, that we need to treat them with dignity and respect and not just objects. But that being put aside, we're just going to use this term object of study. And that could be a number of different things. Maybe your object of study is the game, including its ludic, narrative, and symbolic structures. Maybe your object of study is games in general, in terms of specific technologies. The object could be yourself, it could be a group of players, it could be a subculture, it could be culture, widespread, or it could be multiple cultures. So starting from very small to going very big in scope. A multiple cultural study might be a little bit difficult in the thesis length. That might be a little bit overscoped, but it really depends. So starting with your problem statement can help you determine what your objective study is. So it can help you articulate whether it's the game or how people respond to the game, or maybe things surrounding the game, like the subcultural activities around the game that is really of most interest to you. So we all have many broad interests. Narrow them down into something you can tackle in a short period of time. So you can't put everything into your thesis. It has to be very narrow in terms of scope. So once you figure out what you want to study, then you choose your method to study it. And your method is like a tool in your toolbox, thinking about which tool is best for the job at any given time. So you don't have to be married to any one method. It's just that in this particular process, this seems to be the best tool for answering this specific problem statement or research question. So our default method in the Department of Game Design, particularly for practice-based work, is research through design. And this is very important when you're writing a thesis that's based on your own design work. But there are other similar approaches that you might find helpful. Practice-based research, that's what we're calling the thesis as a whole, but that's also a little subfield within academia. Arts-based research, design through research, action research. So these are key terms that you might want to search for. So say you're having trouble finding something called research through design in the various journals that you're looking through. These other terms might also be relevant to try. And that can include any other methods that center upon analyzing the artistic process as it's happening. You can use whichever method resonates with you as long as it's a supported method by the supervisors and examiners on the team. So it can't be way too far afield. But you have to be clear in your proposal what you have chosen. So you have to make it very obvious. So there are different approaches to methods and what the way that they look at data. So in the social sciences, one way to think of it is, how can I best observe my object of study? So there's this sort of almost detached and observational stance to the object study. That's not true in all the social sciences, of course, or even subfields within it. You know, there's various different types of anthropology, for example, and some are very personal. And we're going to talk about autoethnography later, which is a form of engagement with a text or with a group where you become the object of study, and that's very subjective. But social sciences as a whole tries to kind of have this scientific distance. Whereas in the humanities, it's how can I best interpret my object of study? So if all of you are looking at BioShock or something like that, and you're analyzing it, you know, you are going to have a different interpretation for each person. And that's a feature, not a bug in the humanities. That's what makes your viewpoint unique. So it's not about replicating what other people have done, like it often is in the sciences, and trying to do it in a very rigorous methodological way to see if you get the same findings. It's about your own personal view and your interpretation. So either way, the method that you choose will affect the results that you find because it's shaped by your paradigm. And so therefore, there's this overarching methodology that informs your data collection and analysis. This is your way of looking at the world, the way that you understand data, the way that you are choosing to work with that data. And that will affect the results that you deliver and your discussion of those results. So if you're going to a game, I do live action role playing, so we'll use that as an example. If you're going to a game and you want to analyze the narrative structures in terms of symbolism, for example, that's going to produce very different results than if you're interviewing players about how they engage with that particular narrative. You might find some of the same themes, but one is your viewpoint and the way that you're engaging with the game, and the other one is other players. Okay, so social science methods. So there's observational data, that's watching people play, taking field notes, taking other kinds of measurements. There's quantitative analysis, which is administering surveys or other measurements to try to measure something specific regarding your object of study. So this is the numbers part, where you often see statistics involved. This is considered the most objective and generalizable, and it often includes a large sample size of data. So even if you're doing quantitative methods in your game testing, for example, if you only have 4 players playing your game, then that's not necessarily something that's generalizable. A lot of quantitative studies are going to gather data from a lot more people than that. Then there's qualitative studies, so conducting interviews or embedding yourself into a subculture as a participant observer, or any number of other ways of getting qualitative data in an ethnography, and to learn more about individual or cultural experiences. So this is just one example of qualitative. It can also be reading, blogs about a particular game and analyzing what's in them, or it could be, like I said, close reading, so analyzing the text itself. That's a form of qualitative reading. But it's considered more subjective. It can be called sometimes quote unquote anecdotal and exploratory, but it's not generalizable. That being said, I personally feel that the richness of interview data, this is my bias as a researcher because I've been an interviewer for a very long time. I feel that is in a lot of ways superior to what you get from a quantitative survey. But it might not always be the right tool for the job, as I said. If you want to know how many people have played a certain game, then you don't need to do an in-depth interview, right? You just need to send out a survey and try to get as many people to respond to it as possible. So the qualitative often has smaller sample sizes of data. In the humanities, you can have various ways to interpret an object based on the scholar's own subjective analysis, as we mentioned. And we usually talk about any kind of object as a quote unquote text, even if it's not text on a screen or in a book. A text just means basically an object of study that is there for analysis. So a text could be a song, it could be a video or movie. So text is just sort of generic term that we have for it. And that is used in literary and film analysis, especially. So you might hear the term textual analysis, which is this deep interpretive reading of a text, or you might hear the term close reading, which is used a lot in media studies and especially in game studies. They basically mean somewhat of the same thing. And there's also something called formal analysis, where you're analyzing more the structure of the game, like the mechanics, maybe the story structure, any kind of elements that are of interest to you, and how they interrelate with each other. Yeah. And just a note that many game studies scholars have a background in media studies. So whether they've done like more of a social science or more of a humanities approach, a lot of them have taken a media studies background, including myself. I have 2 degrees in something related to media studies. So you'll see a lot of papers that use these methods, in other words. Humanities can also view the culture in terms of other cultural trends. So for example, historical approaches of ideas. History of ideas is like how a certain concept evolved over time. So maybe some theory or maybe some design trend that then took hold and it became its own subculture, like modding subcultures, for example. You can also look at games as a cultural phenomenon in and of themselves. So how do games shape reality and shape society? You can view the object entirely through one or more specific theoretical lenses that should offer insight into humanity, either at a small scale or a large scale. So it's kind of like wearing a pair of glasses or a pair of sunglasses. You're definitely going to block out certain kinds of information, and you're going to look at the world in a very specific way based on that lens. So some examples here are like political economy. So looking at the way that politics and capitalism affect game production or other economic structures. You could be looking at things through a psychoanalytic lens. So interpreting what might be the unconscious meanings that are being revealed through the text, kind of thinking of texts and games as dreams. So if it's a game that has a lot of surrealistic elements, for example, maybe you might want to use a psychoanalytic lens to try to interpret what this imagery means. Now, those two lenses are very, very different, right? And so understanding what lens you're bringing to the table will help you to be more clear about what method to choose for that. It also helps you construct your theoretical framework, which hopefully you've already done by the time you get to this stage. So humanities does not require the same level of social scientific rigor, I should say. But in fact, a lot of people in the humanities are, I wouldn't say they reject social science, but they're maybe a bit cynical about it or avoidant about it because it takes the human element out of it. Like we talked about how it kind of creates these, objective way of looking at the world, which may or may not be actually objective. Humanities doesn't try to be objective. Even though it doesn't have that same level of rigor, it does have logical structures, techniques, and conventions that are specific to each field. So if you're doing art history background and you're applying that to games, which has happened in this department before, for example, then you're going to be expected to use certain kinds of terms and certain kinds of ways of interpreting. And that will be different than if you're doing, for example, the political economy or psychoanalytic approach. For our purposes, we're happy for you to frame your project through whatever disciplinary lens you like, as long as it's supported by our team members, and it needs to be academically sound. So there are definitely theoretical lenses out there that have been rejected by academia for various reasons. And so if you're trying to use one of those lenses, you're going to have to provide a pretty persuasive argument for why that's relevant. So your supervisor and your other instructors, including your examiner, are here to help guide you, but they may not be subject matter experts on your exact topic. So let's say I'm interested in therapeutic theories of all kinds, which I am, and you pick one that I've never heard of before, which has happened in this thesis supervision. That's great because it's slightly next to something that I know about, and I get to learn from you, and you get to share with me, and I get to share my insights with you. So that is an example, I think, of a good exchange between supervisor and student. But if you come to me with something highly technical about a very specific programming language or very specific mechanical technique that and it's full of a lot of technical jargon, and I will have trouble accessing that, which means I will have trouble giving you meaningful feedback on it. So try to stay within the bounds. So where do you start? We have some resources for research through design, and but these are linked in Studium, and they're also linked here on this PowerPoint, so you should be able to click this when it's uploaded. And really the first place we recommend starting is an anthology by Petri Lankowski and Stefan Björk, who edited Game Research Methods and Overview. And this has a lot of different methods in it, and you can kind of get a sense of how they might be applied to games. All right, thank you very much. Here's my email address if you need to get in contact with me, and happy researching.